Okay, almost done with TNG. Now we do Emergence. This is one of the most screwball episodes ever because of the fact that A, the main cast don't ever figure out what's going on. Yeah, that's kind of glossed over in the episode, but it's one of the key aspects of the story that you need to think about whenever you're trying to use this concept. Okay. In the episode, Data and Geordi speculate that the ship's computer is the source of the emergent entity. Um, for reasons that I'll get into later, I personally, when I watched this episode on its initial broadcast as a teenager, I actually came to the conclusion that this was some sort of an alien organism infecting the ship, and that it wasn't actually the computer of the Enterprise doing this. And that this alien organism had actually potentially stolen a lot of information from the Enterprise D in the course of this, and that if this plot had failed, things would have been better off in the grand scheme of things. But this episode was never followed up on. The emergent organism was never seen again, so we really have no idea what it was doing. Which, to a certain extent, is actually a good thing for an episode like this, because you have that whole sense of wonder and mystery. It's like, what is going on? This is something we've never seen before. So, how does the story start? Well, we have something called a Theta Flux distortion that envelops the ship, and all of a sudden the ship just jumps to warp on its own. Then the crew try to figure out why. They find the emergent organism, and for various reasons, they end up in the holodeck, talking to holographic characters that are apparently speaking on the behalf of the emergent organism because it doesn't really understand how to speak to people directly. So it's using holographic characters as a method of communication. Okay then. Yeah, let's go get into that quick before we get into the rest of it. So the basic gist of it is that the emergent organism creates a holographic simulation out of what Data refers to as a mashup of at least 7 different holographic programs. Side note, as viewers, we have no idea which ones Data's talking about. We do vaguely see things that are kind of sort of familiar from previous episodes. And also, this is noteworthy because of the fact that this is a rare example of Star Trek The Next Generation using stock footage from something that was a TV. Well, actually, no, it was like a regular movie, like an actual movie. They used stock footage of the outside of a train because they just for ambiance needed that, and they didn't have the budget to film it, so they just threw in some stock footage of one. Anyway, so yeah, because the fact that the entity is transporting itself to a location where it's attempting to finish its gestation into a fully realized whatever the heck it is, they have all of the holographic characters in the Orient Express and traveling from wherever the heck they are to some sort of simulated destination that we don't really see. Now, the NPCs call it Vertiform City, but This is because of the fact that the entity is trying to collect vertions, not that we actually know why. It's making a physical body for itself out of vertions, but we I'll get into that later. It goes to several places to get them, and eventually, um, instead of going to a place that naturally produces them, the crew of the Enterprise comes up with the idea of artificially creating vertions, and in the process, helps the entity get finished faster than it would have if they had left it to its own devices. Because apparently the entity just didn't think of making its own vertions. It literally stuck to harvesting naturally created ones. Anyways, so what are vertions? It's just a MacGuffin. It's one of those things where it's like they make up a new kind of particle or energy form that's never talked about before or since. People often confuse vertions with verturons, but they're apparently not the same thing. Literally, the only thing we know about vertions is that they can be created by energizing matter in some way. Yeah. Like I said, it's just a MacGuffin. Anyways, so the emergent property. Um, yeah, the emergent property is the thing on the ship that was creating the emergent life form and apparently shifted whatever heck it was into the emergent life form because the ship's computer stopped doing this after the emergent life form was created. Which begs the question is that if it stopped being on the ship, how did it come to be on the ship in the first place? Again, this is why I personally, watching this, came to the conclusion that it was actually some sort of alien entity that was manipulating the ship, and that it wasn't as harmless as the crew thought it was. Not that we ever actually see it again, and thus we never find out what it did after it left the Enterprise. So, what exactly does the emergent life form look like? That is a very complicated, squiggly, massive, colored spaghetti. We don't actually understand why it's built like this. See, because this is apparently something that the prop people made a physical model of out of some sort of colored plastic, and that it was chosen to um, be a contrast with the other parts of the ship that are not made out of see-through colored plastic. We don't really understand why the thing is this because there is very little discussion of what it is, why it is, and all that stuff. Because people are doing like philosophical pondering about the meaning of consciousness rather than actually trying to figure out what makes this thing tick. After the entire episode is over, we still don't even know why it needed vertions to power itself. It's entirely possible that after it left the ship, as soon as its vertion power supply ran out, it died. We genuinely don't know. It's very, very clunky like that. So what would I do with this in a TTRPG? This is one of those things where a play on the difference between AI and like actual intelligence comes in because of the fact that the emergent entities ability to communicate with the crew of the ship was terrible. The ship's main computer is able to form coherent sentences. The way it's written makes it sound like these are pre-programmed responses. However, either the ship has thousands of pre-programmed responses or the ship is making Mad Libs style uh, sentences out of fragments of several pre-programmed responses so that it simulates speech in a way that actually works. The emergent life form couldn't do that, which is part of the reason why I don't think it was actually the main computer of the Enterprise that was controlling this thing while it was building itself. It did, however, create a hollow program out of pieces of several other hollow programs and used that as a way of communicating, which is interesting because of the fact that the hollow program as a whole was basically a convoluted user interface for the emergent life form, so that all of the holographic characters were speaking for the same emergent life form, and you're talking to different parts of the emergent life form by talking to different holographic characters. That was actually a very interesting idea as a way of having a holodeck gone amok thing, because like there is something controlling it. You don't understand what is controlling it, and that's part of what makes it so scary, but it's not a random malfunction. And that gives you a hook to solve a problem, because just shutting it off is not actually going to give you the information you want. What you want is to figure out what the heck is going on, which you could just shut it off and then find the thingy. But the biggest thing with this, and part of what makes this episode so strange, is that these things, these circuit nodes as they're called, are all over the ship. Yeah, there's several of these. And the final entity looks like a bigger version of those, which makes me question exactly what the heck this thing was. And also, is that where the heck did the Theta Flux distortion come from at the beginning? Was it that the emergent entity somehow created it? Ooh. Again, it's like Starfleet had never actually seen this kind of a hazard in a high enough density to destroy a starship. Enterprise D is the first ones, and their ship is miraculously saved by the emergent entity. Is that actually a coincidence? Canonically, we don't know. And that is part of what makes this episode so ripe for speculation. And it's that aspect of speculation that players would probably go nuts with, because of the fact that ultimately it's an investigation sort of episode. What is this thing? Why is it here? Where did it come from? That's the sort of questions that players have a reason to ask, and that you, as the game master, need to anticipate providing answers for, because the questions are going to come. And this episode, uh, the aired episode didn't answer all of them. In fact, the aired episode seemed to want to philosophize about the joy of seeing a new life form that no one in the galaxy had seen before. And it went with that over the question of what even was that? Not personally a fan of that. And I suspect that if you're doing this in a TTRPG, players would find it supremely unsatisfying to just create this thing and then watch it fly away. At any rate, see you guys later. Hopefully you have fun with this.